Hello, my name is Tyan, and I am a Pure Wellness Specialist with the Pure Wellness Program. Welcome to our event. Please help yourselves to some free pizza, self-care kits over there, and sign up for a draw to win an iPad Pro at the Pure Wellness table. I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Matthieu Bonin, who will be sharing his lived experience with mental health challenges.
Can you hear me if I don't use the mic? Can you guys hear me up top? Perfect. It's okay for you to struggle. It's okay for you to struggle. We live in a time of false perfection. Everybody displays a perfect version of themselves on social media where they are always happy and always succeeding. Perfection leads to misery. It makes you feel lonely and isolated. When you are yourself, when you are your true self, people will feel comfortable around you. If you are yourself, people around you will feel comfortable being themselves. Your imperfection leads to connection. And I'm going to share a story with you of how my friend being vulnerable with me saved my life. I did my undergraduate studies in physics at the University of Ottawa, and I remember being very excited to start this new chapter in my life, my graduate studies in McGill. Now, some of you might be saying, no wonder he had mental health issues, he chose physics as a degree. Truth be told, I was really excited to start. I remember driving the moving truck down with my friend, and Montreal was an awesome city to live in as a student. I remember late nights ending with smoked meat sandwiches at Schwartz, and I remember getting poutines at La Banquise. When I started, I loved it. Most of you would not make a decision which drastically and suddenly makes your mental health decrease. Most of the time, these changes are so gradual that you don't realize it's happening. I don't have a specific day, I don't have a specific moment. But I remember one day just being aware that I'm miserable. And I remember having the thought, I will be happy when. I had a conference in Italy lined up, and I wasn't allowing myself to experience happiness in the present. I said, I'll be happy when I go to the conference, which I know is not a good mindset, but that's where I was. And from the outside, things seemed great. I was getting amazing grades at school. I had great scholarships. I was about to publish my first research article. From the outside, things seemed great, but from the inside, I was miserable. And so I went to the conference, and yes, I experienced some happiness and some joy. I was in Italy. I was in Lucca in the mountains. We had wine. We were surrounded by olive trees, so we had fresh olive oil. I loved dunking my bread in there. And the Italians, they know how to eat. So we ate well. I remember a moment where it switched. And it was probably already due to my interior state, or maybe I caught this person at the wrong moment. But I met a physicist who I was really excited to meet. And when I met him, he kind of just brushed me off. And for me, this triggered a full-on existential crisis. I had a moment of realization, this is not who I want to be. And I think I was put face to face with how I was acting leading up to this conference. Because truth be told, I was neglecting my family. I was neglecting my friends, all in the pursuit of success. And so the conference ended, and why not? I got 2 weeks, so I used that to travel Italy and Spain. And I had some great experiences visiting Pompeii and the Amalfi Coast. But I remember a moment on a beach in Italy where it was beautiful, but I was still miserable. And I broke down crying. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't normal. So when I got back from the conference, that was the time I was supposed to be happy, and I was even more miserable than when I had left. And so that's when my mental health started going down very rapidly. When you are in pain, it's a normal thought to have, I want this pain to end. When you are in a lot of pain, that thought is even stronger. When you are facing an insurmountable amount of pain, and you see no end in sight of it ever getting better, it is not a healthy thought, but it is a normal thought to think, I want to die. And that is the origin of suicidal thoughts. It is in the face of pain that you never see going away. And I think all human beings will experience these thoughts when they're subjected to that amount of pain. Know that they're not healthy thoughts, but they are normal thoughts. I had never heard anybody spoke about suicide or depression, and so I felt alone and terrified. Truth be told, I didn't really care how it was done. I just wanted to die. Sorry, these are hard memories to revisit with you. For me, the fantasy that would play itself over was just to throw myself in front of the metro. And these thoughts were getting more frequent and more intense and scarier. And I didn't know who or how to open up about them. It was when I was at my lowest point that I thought of my friend. 2 years earlier, he had opened up about a depressive episode. And truth be told, I didn't really understand his experience. But I didn't judge him. I was his friend, and I just wanted him to be well. And it's because he was imperfect, it's because he was vulnerable with me, that I felt comfortable opening up to him. And so I picked up the phone, called him, and pretty much had a full-on breakdown. He said, Matt, here's what I want you to do. Tomorrow, I want you to go to school and go to the counseling department. I didn't know we had a counseling department until I was in crisis. I'm glad my friend was vulnerable with me. Otherwise, I might not be here speaking with you today. So I went to the counseling department. I decided the best thing for me to do was to take a step back from my studies. I spoke to my supervisor, which I was afraid of doing. But once I opened up to him, he had compassion. Gave my lab mate the day off to spend with me until my family came to pick me up. I felt very lost and directionless for a while, but that's what brought me here to Laurentian University. I decided to switch directions and become a teacher. So I went to the teacher college in French here. And so this is what I hope you absorb from my story. The first is, it's okay to struggle. The second is, be vulnerable with those you love and those you trust. If you are vulnerable with others, they will feel comfortable being vulnerable with you. Be the you you are, not the you the world wants you to be. Your wounds have the power to heal. Your darkness has the power to bring light. You are all wonderful. You are all beautiful. Thank you so much for listening. If there's any questions, I would love to answer them.
When you went to your school, you were at McGill at that time?
Yes.
And what was your experience like there? Because here at Laurentian, we have like an amazing small school, so it's easy to get those services. But I've heard that it can be difficult to get help at larger schools.
I think I kind of gradually, without realizing it, isolated myself. You know, my research laboratory was in a basement, and I was kind of just nose to the grindstone. Like some days I wouldn't see the sun. You know, I was just working totally unhealthy hours. And like I said, when you're not well, your perspective is just off, you know? So I kind of just gradually I wasn't isolated when I started my studies, but I kind of gradually did it to myself without realizing it. And we had the services, but I wasn't aware we had them until I called my friend and he made me aware they existed.
Could you repeat the question for me for the camera?
Sure. Well, can you repeat your question so I can repeat it? I think it was,
Like, what was your experience like getting help for your mental health at a bigger institution?
what was the experience getting mental health help at a bigger institution?
I just wanted to ask about your experience with like doing the swim around Manitoulin.
Manitoulin swim? Yeah.
And maybe the role that maybe exercise or some sort of activity plays for you, and if that will help in that way.
Yeah, so he's asking about the swim around Manitoulin and the role exercise plays. I knew I wanted to be a speaker before I wanted to swim around Manitoulin. I thought doing something crazy would give me the platform I needed to speak. And exercise is huge. It really boosts your confidence, really boosts your self-esteem. You're naturally releasing some feel-good brain chemicals like endorphins. There's communities that you're joining, gyms or, there's a communal aspect which is great. After the swim, I experienced a big crash. So it's not foolproof, you know? It has its limits as well, if I'm being a realist, you know? But to give you hope, I've always bounced back from every single depression I've had. I've had a lot. I think that my perspective on my depressions are different. They are just atrocious things and horrible to go through. But when I pull out, that's what gives me strength. I had the mental strength to swim around Manitoulin because of my depressions. I probably would not have done that had I lived a normal life. You know, having gone through those really hard times made me a very empathic person. I can empathize with those of you who struggle, and people feel comfortable opening up to you. And like I said, your darkness, your depressions are things that maybe you feel ashamed of, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't be ashamed to be sick. The shame should be that we live in a society that shames those of you who are sick. That needs to change. So it's not foolproof. Hopefully, did I answer your question? It's not foolproof, but it really helps. Yeah.
What is your attitude towards, you know how you said you didn't even know there was a counseling office, and maybe do you have any tips of how we can change the system, maybe outreach, or maybe some sort of innovative ideas to allow people to be more forthcoming in their struggles? Or?
Yeah. So it's what can we do to kind of normalize it? Is that your experience? Normalize counseling, normalize.
And make this a system that maybe students have more
approachability, to make it more approachable. I think the first step is in normalizing it. There is a lot of stigma around mental health. I've faced it. I think the only way the stigma is going to go away is if people are willing to openly endure it. Because it takes a few people to step forward, and once you start stepping forward, others start stepping forward, and once enough people step forward, that's when the stigma disappears. I think when you're going through mental health episodes, you are experiencing something people don't understand. And so that's where the stigma comes from. It comes from a lack of understanding. How can you be in so much pain with no external source to it? Just because the source is not visible to you doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think the more people open up and speak about their experiences, it will normalize it. And I think we're moving in the right direction, but we have a lot of ground to cover. I thank you for your courage for asking these questions.
The way you put it, wonderful. There's no source, but there's no external source. But it's hard to perceive.
It's imperceivable. It doesn't mean there's no source to it. It's just not a visible source. There is a source to your pain. And just because it's not obvious to others doesn't mean you're not living it. But the reason you don't receive empathy is because people don't see the source of your pain. Coping skills are many. You know, there's no quick solution to mental health, and I'm not a mental health professional. Like I do the full approach, you know, talk to a medical professional, that's huge. Your brain is an organ. There's an element of biology to it as well. So medication, therapy, all the traditional treatments for mental health. Community is a huge one. For me, I notice isolation is a huge trigger. And I think we're coming out of a period of great isolation, so I think people are not well. Being vulnerable. People won't help you if they don't know you need help. And so it's hard to speak up for yourself, especially when you speak up for yourself and you're shot down. It's extremely painful. That's the scary part of being vulnerable, is if someone shoots you down when you're vulnerable, then you feel even worse. So vulnerability with the right people who will empathize with you, connection, awareness that it's not forever. When you're in your first depressive episode, you don't know it's going to end. And that's when despair sinks in. When you think this pain is never going to go away, it's normal to think you don't want to go on. Because nobody wants to live in that amount of pain. But you can have joy even after despair. Yes? Can you speak up a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so a lot of the talk about depression is that you actually can't be able to live with hypertrophy. And just from your story, I was just going to ask, do you think that you becoming a teacher has kind of allowed you to create that identity and kind of yourself?
I think I haven't gone into the severity of my depressive episodes. That was my first one, but I've had many since then. And for me, they get incredibly severe. I get catatonic. So I get trapped in my body. I can't move. I can't speak sometimes for days. Your identity kind of dies. Everything that makes you who you are is kind of gone. And that is extremely hard to understand and cope with. I never thought I would live a normal life again. When I went from that low to normal, my mindset shifted. There's nothing to stop me from going from normal to extraordinary. And I think many people you never would have guessed had depression were great leaders, like Martin Luther King, like Gandhi, like Abraham Lincoln. If you study their lives, they've all had very severe mental health episodes. And you're not in a place to lead when you're going through a mental health episode, but once you pull out, how can you not empathize with others who are struggling when you know what it's like to feel that much pain? And so I think there is kind of a death of your identity for a bit. But when you come out of it, you can have a strengthening of your identity. Truth be told, when you're really depressed, your perspective is just off. It's a hard mental space to describe, but it's just off. You don't even think you're worth helping. And so maybe they don't want to be vulnerable because they don't, like when you're that low, you're like, you don't even think you're worth helping. It's a hard mental space to describe unless you've lived it. Like I remember being severely depressed and going to a bookstore and wanting to buy a book and having the thought, I'm not worth this book, which is a weird thought. But I believed it at the time. I don't believe it now that I'm well. So it's hard to be there for someone who's suffering that much. It's very difficult. I don't have a clear-cut answer for you. I've learned to ask someone directly, how can I be there for you? We're not taught to care for each other. It's weird. I feel like that should be a crucial life skill, but we're not taught how to be there for each other. When people are grieving, when people are suffering, we're not taught that, at least not traditionally in society. One of the best ways is ask someone directly, how can I be there for you? And offer very concrete ways. So when I'm very unwell, like I said, I can't move, I can't speak, so people will be like, oh, get out of the house. That's not realistic for me today. The most realistic thing for me today is maybe get out of my bed once. And I can't be there the way people want me to be there for them. So how do you help someone who's suffering that much? There's no clear-cut answer to that. I think patience, giving them hope, knowing that one day they will be better if you provide them the services, letting them know that it's okay to suffer. Letting them know that they're loved even when they're suffering that much. Letting them know they are worth helping. Yes?
Did you have any tools or communities that helped you, be it counseling or spirituality or medication that you can point to that?
All of it.
Yeah.
It's not like I have appendicitis, let's cut the appendix out, you're healed, you're better, right? It's a multifaceted approach. Mental health is a very complicated issue. There's a biological side to it, there's an environmental side to it, there's a social side to it, there's a psychological aspect. So you got to approach you have to have a holistic approach to it. You know? Like I said, for me, exercise was huge, community was huge, therapy was huge, medication. Spirituality, I meditate a lot. I don't know if some of you saw me meditating to try to calm my brain down before coming to speak with you. But what works for me won't necessarily work for you because you're different than I am, right? So I think it's experimentation, exploring, and having those conversations with professionals as well. Because as I said, I'm not a professional, but I know how to care for people and make them feel seen and heard.
And a follow-up to that, I believe that the stigma around being mentally unwell is beginning to change, but I think the tools that help someone become mentally well, there's still stigma around those things. So going to counseling, there's a lot of shame around that, or using medication for a short period or extended period of time. There's a lot of shame around that. How do you think we can combat those things or support individuals who choose to use those methods to better themselves?
I think it's a matter of time before things change, but we're moving in the right direction. And then we're going to look back at this time now and be like, how could we have been that way as a society? You know? If someone says, I go to therapy, be like, that's awesome. Just normalize it, right? People don't freak out. It's like, I'm going to see the heart specialist. You don't go, oh, what are you doing? You know, it's just nonsense when you really step back and examine it, right? So someone says, I'm going to therapy, be like, that's good for you. I'm proud of you, right? Or I'm starting medication for my, that's, you're taking care of yourself, Reinforce those positive steps. Normalize it. If you're not there yet, it's okay. Every time I get up on a stage and I speak, I have people come speak to me and say, I thought I was alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. And the more people see it, the more it normalizes it. I'll take one last question. We have one last question? Yes. Sure, yeah. Yes, what do you specifically want to know about it? Yeah. Yeah. It was like I said, it was just a crazy idea, right? The craziest part of the story is I'm not a natural swimmer. When I was severely depressed, I was a really big guy, not a natural athlete whatsoever. What led to swimming for me was a broken foot. As a kid, I hated swimming lessons because I would fail them all. And I dropped out of swimming because I'm like, well, I'm no good at that. What led me back to it was a broken foot. I'm like, this is the only way I could stay active. And when I started swimming, I was dying to make it across the pool. Like I said, my mindset was different. I know growth because I've gone from being that low to normal. So I know you can grow, you know. So my first goal was to swim across Lake Ramsey. And I was swimming for summer camps, Camp Quality, which is a summer camp for kids who have cancer. And that just snowballed into